Everyone, take a moment and stay with me here, because something just happened in Washington that most people are only half hearing about, and the half they're hearing doesn't explain what this actually means for real life, for how fast things get done, how stable public services remain, and what happens the next time government systems start slowing down again. This isn't one of those loud, dramatic changes that shows up overnight. It's quiet, it's technical, and because of that, it's easy to miss. But decisions like this shape how the government functions for years, not weeks. And once they're in place, they're very hard to undo. So let's slow this down and talk about what just happened, why it matters, and how it reaches much farther than most people realize. Earlier this week, the US House of Representatives passed a bill that directly responds to executive actions taken earlier this year. The bill is called the Protect America's Workforce Act, and it passed by a vote of 231 to 195. Now, numbers like that can blur together if you're not watching closely. But there's something important hidden in that vote count. This wasn't just one party pushing it through on its own. Roughly 20 Republicans joined Democrats to support the bill. And in the current political climate, especially on issues involving labor and government workers, that kind of crossover doesn't happen casually. It tells you lawmakers understood this vote wasn't symbolic. It was meant to send a message. To understand why, we need to go back a few months. Earlier this year, President Trump signed a series of executive orders, first in March, then expanded again in August. Those orders removed collective bargaining rights from large portions of the federal workforce. Not a small group, over 1 million federal employees, with some estimates placing it closer to 2/3 of all federal workers, were affected. More than 40 federal agencies were instructed to cancel or end existing union contracts. The administration's explanation was national security. The legal authority came from a law passed in 1978, which allows presidents to limit union activity in agencies connected to intelligence or national security operations. On paper, that sounds straightforward, but the reality is more complicated, because the agencies affected weren't limited to intelligence services. The list included places like the Department of Veterans Affairs, Treasury, Commerce, NOAA, parts of Homeland Security, and sections of the State Department. These are agencies that process benefits, run hospitals, track storms, handle paperwork, and provide services most Americans rely on, often without ever thinking about who's behind the scenes making it work. So naturally, lawmakers started asking questions. Is this truly about national security, or is it a broader effort to weaken unions across the federal government? That question is what pushed the House to act. From the administration's perspective, the argument has consistently been about efficiency. Officials said unions slow things down. They pointed to what's called official time, hours federal employees can spend on union-related duties instead of their regular work. House Oversight Chair James Comer stated that in 2024, federal workers spent more than 3 million hours on union business, costing taxpayers over $200 million. At first glance, those numbers sound alarming. 3 million hours, $200 million. It's easy to stop there and assume something is wrong, but context matters. Those 3 million hours represent less than 0.1% of total federal work hours in a year, and the 200 million accounts for roughly 0.03% of federal discretionary spending. In other words, these numbers are real, but they're not typically the kind of figures that drive sweeping structural changes, unless there's something else behind the decision. Supporters of the House bill argued exactly that. They said collective bargaining in the federal workforce isn't about blocking reform. It's about creating a system where problems can be raised early, addressed before they spiral, and resolved without chaos. And there's another detail that often gets overlooked. Federal unions cannot negotiate pay. They cannot negotiate benefits. They cannot strike. What they negotiate are working conditions, scheduling, safety policies, staffing levels, and grievance procedures, things that directly affect morale and retention, not the federal budget. And that brings us to a key concern that came up repeatedly during debate: turnover. Several lawmakers pointed to past examples where collective bargaining rights were sharply reduced. One of the most cited cases was Wisconsin in 2011, when public sector bargaining rights were rolled back. What followed wasn't a surge in efficiency, it was an exodus. Experienced workers left, applications dropped, services suffered, and once institutional knowledge disappears, it's extremely difficult to rebuild. That's the fear many lawmakers expressed here, not just that workers lose protections, but that the government itself becomes less functional over time. This concern isn't theoretical. Federal workers reacted almost immediately after the House vote. In online forums, comment sections, and internal discussions, many expressed relief, not because everything was solved, but because Congress pushed back at all. For some workers, the vote felt like a signal, a sign that someone noticed what was happening. At the same time, there was skepticism. Many workers said openly, "This will probably be vetoed," and realistically, they're not wrong. President Trump has been clear that he views these executive orders as necessary. Overriding a veto would require a 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate, which is extremely unlikely. So what you see among workers right now is a mix of hope and resignation, relief that the House acted, expectation that it may not last, and that emotional back and forth is taking a toll. Many workers connect this fight to broader, longer-term plans to reshape the federal government. You'll often hear them reference Project 2025, a comprehensive conservative blueprint for restructuring federal agencies. Whether you support it or oppose it, the fact that workers are discussing it tells you something important. They feel like their jobs, protections, and careers are constantly being reconsidered, often without much warning. Add to that what many call shutdown fatigue. Anytime Congress debates labor rights or budgets, federal employees immediately brace for disruption. Even when shutdowns don't happen, the threat alone affects planning, finances, and mental health. And this is where people outside the federal workforce should start paying attention, because this doesn't stay contained inside government offices. When federal workers lose protections, turnover rises. When turnover rises, experience drops. And when experience drops, services slow. That means delays in Social Security processing, backlogs in disability and veterans benefits, slower disaster response, longer waits for permits, approvals and payments that ripple into the private economy. Critics of unions argue that they protect underperforming workers and resist necessary reform. That concern shouldn't be ignored. Accountability matters in any large system, but accountability doesn't always come from removing protections. Sometimes it comes from better management, improved technology, and real investment in training. What this House vote really represents is a disagreement over how government should work. One side believes stronger executive control leads to efficiency. The other believes stability and labour protections create better long-term performance. And the reason this debate keeps returning is simple. Neither side is completely wrong. Complicating things further, this vote didn't happen in a vacuum. Earlier this year, a federal judge temporarily blocked the executive orders. A higher court later reversed that decision, allowing agencies to move forward. Some departments have already ended union contracts. Others are still in limbo. So even with the House vote, uncertainty remains. As this bill moves to the Senate, its path is unclear. Only one Republican senator has co-sponsored the Senate version so far, making passage difficult. Union leaders warn that if this effort fails, future executive actions could go even further. And that brings us to a broader question that affects everyone. How much authority should a president have over the civil service? How much oversight should Congress exercise? And how do workers and the public they serve fit into that balance? These questions aren't easy, but understanding them helps explain why government services sometimes slow down, why rules change suddenly, and why stability matters more than many people realize. If you have a reaction to this, even just a feeling, share it in the comments. And if you want clear, calm explanations like this without the noise, make sure you're subscribed. Staying informed may not fix everything, but it does give you clarity in a system that often thrives on confusion. Thanks for being here.